Hi, this is Antoine, writer and creator of The Peril of Haven. Welcome back to those of you who have already been listening, and for those of you who have not, welcome. I recommend going back to the first episode. This episode contains our second ever content warning. It deals with homelessness. It mentions in passing some of the abuse that people facing homelessness might have to deal with. There are also passing mentions of drug addiction, and the episode does end with a decent amount of gore and just some light body horror. So please move forward in whatever way will be healthiest for you. And if you think that it might not be safe for you to listen to this episode, please keep an eye out for a summary, which I will share. And with that being said, let's get weird. The Peril of Haven, Episode 5, Marked, Part 2, Homeless.
It took me 5 days to start to engage with the world again, and another 5 weeks to begin to feel like myself. It's strange. Between that first day waking up in the park and coming here to the tent city, only 2 weeks had passed. Yet somehow, some sense of me was there from the beginning. Waking up with no memory couldn't rob me of my sense of self. Even disliking the person who I had presumably conditioned myself to be before the memory loss didn't do that. If anything, it made me feel more solid in who I am. I felt like I was my true self without the social context or pressures that bend and twist us into lesser or greater versions of ourselves. But losing my home, that dreary apartment with the awful carpet, took something vital from me. Losing my journal, a relic of the person who I used to be, a man who I can neither stomach nor remember, took away a sense of purpose and solidity that I didn't realize I had in this world. I don't know if I can get those things back. I know that if I do, they won't be the same as they were. I think we take for granted the stability of our place in the world. I don't know that I can become disillusioned enough to believe that again. I suspect something will always feel tenuous for me now. Even though I no longer have the journal or the adventures to follow, it seemed right to start recording again. I have to put in the effort to reconnect with the world and myself. Acknowledging it seems like a good place to start. The other people here in the tent city watched me suspiciously for the first few days. I don't mean to imply that they were hostile or even actively unwelcoming, but they held me at a distance. I've been here for only a few weeks, and I can see why. The people here are not treated kindly. During those first few days, I didn't do much of anything. I barely left the spot where I had hunkered down that first night. I admit that I was feeling sorry for myself. Even though they were wary of me, they still looked out for me. Whenever I would wake up, there would be a small assortment of food next to me. A donut, half of a sandwich, cold coffee, sometimes a burger. No one ever took credit for it. I suspect it was a group effort. After several days, I finally got up. I can't say that I was feeling any better, but something in me just couldn't abide taking these people's help without contributing anything myself. Just a few days before, I had been in a home with anything I could need, a large supply of cash, and unlimited time to pursue whatever I wanted, or rather, felt I needed to. Yet here I was, wallowing and allowing these people who had so little, for who knows how long, bring me food while there was a chance, no matter how small, that I might be able to go home any day. so I watched to decide my next move. For the most part, people kept to themselves, or within their small circles. The only exception was an older woman. I noticed that at some point every day most people talked to her. Once I forced myself to move, I introduced myself to her. She said her name was Olivia. I asked if she was keeping things organized around here. She laughed. The idea of someone thinking this place was organized was hilarious to her. But yes, she said, she helped make sure that everyone was able to get by. If someone had a good day and had something to spare, she made sure it got to someone who wasn't having a great day. If there was a disagreement, she often helped to settle it, and people listened to what she said. If someone saw something dangerous, like overzealous cops or business owners putting rat poison in their dumpsters, they told her, and she made sure word got around. She was clearly selling herself short if she thought she wasn't keeping this place running at least as well as the rest of the town. I asked what I could do to help. She told me to focus on taking care of myself, and gave me a few places throughout town where I would be able to beg, or find some food that would still be good. I told her that I needed to avoid the police, and she didn't ask why. She told me to avoid a few of the places she had mentioned earlier, and said to make sure that I don't cause any trouble in the tent city. After a week or two, I was bringing in enough to feed myself and maybe even a little bit to share. I asked Olivia if she could find out whether the police were still watching my apartment. She watched me for a moment. I suppose she was deciding whether or not to risk it. Maybe she was even considering asking what I had done to have law enforcement so interested in me. After a moment, she nodded and said that she knew a few people who frequented the area. Apparently, I was living in an area where people had enough to spare change regularly, but little enough to be empathetic to the struggle of others. After a few days, Olivia came up to me with a man. It was the man whose hoodie I had bought when I lost my apartment. He had another hoodie, but it wasn't new. I guess he probably gave most of the money to Olivia. Trent says there's still more police around that apartment building than usual, Olivia told me. Something is off about some of them, Trent cuts in before I could respond. Makes me wonder what's got you hiding. Ain't you the one gave me a wad of cash for an old hoodie? I nodded. I hope you're not tracking trouble here like mud. All we got's this community here. His words were sobering. I had spent so long feeling sorry for myself for losing everything, it hadn't even occurred to me to be thankful for what I gained. I hadn't reached rock bottom. Here was a community of people who had so little and still took care of each other, including me. I said that I didn't think I was bringing any trouble, and that I wouldn't go looking for it either. I promised if anything caught up with me, I wouldn't return and risk bringing it back to the tent city. Olivia nodded. That seemed to be enough for her. She said she would discourage anyone from nosing in my business, to avoid giving the authorities any reason to follow them back here. It seemed to me that she was directing that last part more to Trent than to me. To be completely honest, before the conversation with Olivia and Trent, I was intending on going by my apartment myself to see if I could get in. Obviously, I can't risk everyone here. I have to admit to a certain sense of hopelessness. I think, even in my despair, I thought I'd be able to get back to my home sooner or later. Unfortunately, that is seeming less and less likely. I'm not sure where to go from here. I have no way to contact Cardia. The cafe where I met her is too close to the apartment building to risk going there. Leaving Haven seems like my best option, but where would I go? I don't know how far it is to the next town, and even if I did, I don't have identification or any other paperwork to get myself established anywhere else. And there's a small part of me, a dense, heavy, gnarled, stubborn bit, that refuses to allow the horrors I've experienced to be for nothing. The idea of leaving here without learning anything is unconscionable. And so I wait. I contribute to the community where I can. I listen to people's stories. I live. And I keep my eyes open for an opportunity to find my purpose. And I'll record. Tomorrow is another day. It's been a week since my last recording. Today is May 16th. Olivia mentioned that she has been keeping an eye on the newspaper to see if my family or the authorities have posted a photo of me. I haven't touched a newspaper since I woke up in the park. I feel so foolish that I haven't been looking to see if maybe someone was looking for me. So now I know. Today is Monday, May 16th. The authorities have not posted any wanted notices for me. No one has posted any photos of me as a missing person. I find it hard to believe that the gregarious person who wrote that journal didn't have people who would miss him. I suppose I did seem to plan to go off the grid. Maybe I was lonelier than I let on. I mentioned to Olivia that I wasn't sure if anyone was looking for me. I explained that my memory only went back about 2 months, and that I had been with them for most of it. She said that she would go to the police station and check the missing persons posts. Trent, of course, wouldn't have it. He was still suspicious of me, worried that I'm going to bring some trouble here. He said he didn't want Olivia risking herself for me. He said he would bring someone and go himself. That was a few hours ago. I've been here, keeping Olivia company. It might be more accurate to say that I've been here imposing myself on her while I've been too nervous to go anywhere else. Trent came back. The man he brought with him didn't. Trent says that after they left the station, his companion went off to bring some food back. I'm not sure that I believe him. There's something off about him. I've been watching Trent all day since he got back. He looks sick. Occasionally, he'll see me watching him and he'll smile. Not the kind of smile that I see in my dreams, but definitely not friendly. Not that I'd expect that from him. While Trent is not shy about his dislike of me, and even less so about his distrust, I don't grudge him for it. He's worried about the community. It's what I admire most about him. I say this just to have on record that I am not suspicious of him for any petty reason. I fully admit that I may be paranoid after all I've been through, and if I'm mistaken, that is why. But I am not petty. And I will not begrudge a man for wanting to protect his family. That's what this is. This place is a community, but it's also a family. With that in mind, I gave Olivia the cash that I've been able to save from panhandling. She refused to take it at first. I told her that I just wanted her to hold on to it for me. That way, if something did happen to me, she could use it for the community. I was right to leave the money with Olivia. I went walking tonight, as I often do when I'm feeling restless. A little ways from the tent city, further from town, are train tracks running over a river. Sometimes I like to come here to think. Once or twice I arrived just in time to keep a friend who was trying to stay clean from using. More often, I can only tell them that tomorrow is another day. Tonight, I was alone. Initially. Trent showed up after I had been looking into the river for a few minutes. "You never asked me what I found at the station," he said. I hadn't. I was so taken in by a sense of wrongness that I hadn't even thought to ask. I asked then. He smiled. He looked very ill and his gums were bleeding, maybe not profusely, but enough that I could tell even though the moon was halfway to waning. I took an involuntary step back. "I know who you are," he sang at me. What could I say to that? Blood was starting to drip from the corner of his mouth. I asked him if he was okay. Did he need me to run to get Olivia? She would know what to do. At the mention of Olivia, the feverish light left his eyes for a moment, and he yelled, "Don't you bring her anywhere near this!" I felt blood and spit spatter my face. "Trent, you're not well. We need to get you some help." I was almost begging. "I need help! I need help!" He was shouting at me at this point. He started laughing just as my arms were yanked behind me. It was the man who went with Trent to the station. Steve, or Carl, or Keith? I don't know. He was a bloody mess. His face and neck were covered in lacerations. Trent ripped my shirt open. His companion tossed me over so that Trent was now holding me. He turned me to face bloody Steve, or whoever. Steve rubbed his hand down his face. I watched in horror as the cuts in his face parted like mouths, some tearing further open. He pressed his bloody hand to my chest. "You did this to us," Trent whispered in my ear. "We walked into the Viper's den for you, and now you're going to get bit." I could feel the warm, thick blood and saliva mixture running down my neck. Steve held his hands over his mouth, blood pouring from between his fingers. I could feel solid chunks sliding down my torso. Before I worked up the nerve to look, Steve held his hands out to me, filled with bloody teeth. He was grinning at me. I didn't know that smile could get worse, but seeing it up close with empty, bloody sockets still dripping, I lunged back as hard as I could. I heard Trent's head hit the stone arch that supported the train tracks. His grip loosened and I slipped out, leaving my shirt in his grasp. Steve, or Keith, laughed and lunged at me. I dove to the side. I was screaming. I think I started when I first saw Steve's face. I don't think I ever stopped. I felt like I was so full of scream that I would never have space in me to inhale again. I wanted with every fiber of my being to run back to the tent city and get help, but I made a promise. I couldn't bring this back to the people who had given me so much over the past month and a half. Steve grabbed my foot, the skin from his face peeling away in tatters and wrapping around my ankle like some kind of tentacle. I kicked back with my free foot and yanked the other one at the same time. He made no sound of protest, but the sound his face made as it tore from his skull. It was somehow both crunchy and wet. The back of Trent's head was bleeding pretty badly, as was his mouth. I ran away from the tent city. They both followed. Carl, Steve, dropped almost immediately. My hope was that they would both bleed out while running after me. If Trent was slowing, it wasn't nearly enough for me. I ran into the river. It was cold, but it wasn't moving very fast. And fortunately for me, it wasn't very deep except for in the middle. That was where I lost Trent. He never came back up on the other side. I collapsed as soon as I hit dry land. I rolled onto my back, watching for Trent. Not like I could have done anything if he had resurfaced. If it wasn't for the adrenaline rush, I don't think I would have made it across the river. And I was spent. Once I felt capable of moving again, I started crawling toward the woods. Just before I crossed the tree line, I felt something on my ankle. The strips of face were still there. They wriggled weakly before falling away. They immediately shriveled into almost nothing. If If I hadn't seen them wither away myself, I wouldn't have been able to identify them. For now, I'm in the woods just outside of Haven. I lost everything, from the community that I had just found to the shirt off my back. All I have is a recorder that is apparently waterproof. I don't have the luxury of falling into despair this time. There's no one to take pity on me and bring me food. I have to rest and figure out how I'm going to survive long enough to plan a next step.
The Peril of Haven is written, produced, and directed by Antoine Martinez-Jones. The voice of Haven is Benji Divert, and music, as always, is by the wonderful Hanukkah O'Neill. If you want to share thoughts, theories, or just say hi, you could reach us on Instagram and Facebook. The links to those pages will be in the show notes. And don't forget, smile.